October 10th meeting. So just go.
All right, good. So I could see in the back there what's moving and what's going on. So thank you guys for the opportunity. My name's Cisco, and I want to at least highlight a couple of things. First of all, you know, we've got a lot of firms who are actually engaging with us and helping us kind of run through this process. We've got the ones that I think Dr. Sheridan mentioned ahead of time who are helping enroll, but you know, I want to give also some credit to you know, Catherine's here from Medtronic, and there's a couple of other manufacturers here who've been really engaged with us to help really learn, right? We learn a lot of the complexity. Some of that stuff will come up as we go through the presentation here, but just to understand that this isn't just the participants that we're really getting a lot of value on. Even in the process of clarifying what happened, you know, how do we go through the appraisal, what needs to go on, we are learning and gathering a lot and adjusting as we go through the activity. The second piece of it is, I mean, it's very interesting to see and hear, but you heard it from Rob there. You know, we're not looking for records. We're not looking for your SOPs. That's already been done. We want to get past that, right? We want to get to some of the elements I think that he got to towards the end there, right? How do you get to that alignment? How do you get to that culture? How do you get to the idea that, you know, everybody knows what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how it plays into the delivery of that product? And that's really, I think, where there's a lot of value here and why there's something impactful within the approach. So that's just a couple of points that I thought were great to make, because I think they'll align with some of the stuff we're going to be going through in the presentation moving forward. So, you know, what do we want to get through? Our experiences to date, you know, and we'll give you, I'm going to be very open about what we've learned, you know, some transparency into our systems and its limitations as we move forward. Comments on the program. So you're going to find that's going to be a little sparse. We haven't gotten any official comments yet, so I've got some anecdotes I'll share and go from there. What can you expect in the upcoming pilot announcement? And then some things to look forward to, again, for this afternoon's discussion as we're thinking towards the future and what we want to really move and get done with this. So, experiences from the pilot. You saw this. We've got this question several times, you know, what can we expect? How do we do this? From the standpoint of people who are in the regulatory space at a company, right, where your job is really to help manage that activity, in some cases really protect the company to make sure everything's moving forward. Having that consistency, having something that you can tangibly point to and say, these are the expectations that are needed of me, it's key. And the reality of the matter is, as you've seen here, it's not that simple with this process, right? We really have to engage. We really have to think things through a little differently. The work that happens, what's going on at each individual site, how they're looking at things, how they've got their objectives set, where do they want to be, it varies, and we need to be able to account for that. So that's something that I think it's been a big learning from us, and something I think we need to work towards in terms of how do we communicate this to anybody who's going to enroll and participate down the road. Because it's not going to be as simple as, here's all the elements that you've got to do and what you need to achieve. It's going to be, here's what you can expect. Here is the type of engagement you're going to have. And maybe that's how we start couching things moving forward. We've hit limits, right? We've understood now where our system limits and our internal process constraints are at CDRH when we're trying to modify and move some of these changes. I'll give you one very easy example, right? We're working when you participate, when you're enrolled and you're accepted in the plan, you come off of our surveillance plan, and we move forward from there. We've got a process, we've established that, we went through. It wasn't as simple as that. You know, we actually got the situation where once we did all that, one of the enrolled sites, a few weeks later, got a call from an FDA investigator saying they were going to be on site. We had to go back, call the district, find out what was going on, what happened, and we learned, right? It's just something that we're going to have to work through. ORA is managing a very complex system. They do all their planning a year and ahead. This is asking them to be very dynamic about that, and it's not exactly structured. So there will be those hiccups, and we're going to have to manually manage those. But from that take and that standpoint, I want to assure for a lot of people who've always asked the question, how is the field responding? How is the field engaging? They were phenomenal. Once we got on the phone with them, explained what was going on, what was happening, they really did work through, and then they explained to us where that limitation is and came up with some ideas that we can try to really incorporate into the process to try to manage that moving forward. So, you know, it's really been, that was a significantly less painful process than I thought it was going to be from my end, and they were very supportive of the activity. Not saying it's going to prevent everything moving forward, but at least we've got some way to engage around that and some way to manage it when it happens. We've learned, even with the construct of how 30-day notices and these modifications are going to be implemented, there are limits, again, to how the submissions get put in, how that gets processed. That's something that when we're working through and really developing that structure and what that might look like to the point later, we're going to have to put those constraints in and just manage them through that activity. Interesting, really got introduced into the concept of something that I thought originally we'd have to completely take off the table, which was, well, combination products, that's a mess. I don't want to deal with that right now. We're not going to put that into the process and the activities. Some of the facilities who are, you know, heavily device manufacturer still fall into a category of a combination product. So how do we carve out expectations around that to allow that process to still happen for us to engage, but still maybe put bounds around where the expectation might be if it touches, you know, a cross-center activity. So there's opportunities there, and we've actually got people engaged to work that through, but I can assure you that's going to be a little bit of an iterative back and forth process until we get that resolved, but that's something that will be made visible and available as we move forward. Something that came up very recently, and it's mentioned even here, right, the coordination with our MDSAP program. You know, we thought straight through, we engaged with our, you know, our planning groups with ORA. Honestly, this was me. It never occurred to me what's going to happen with an MDSAP audit that happened in the interim of all this ongoing, and that was brought up very recently. So we've got internal work to go back and do and make sure that it's not a disalignment, right? The MDSAP audit happens, but if there's a disconnect, how do we address that? How do we move forward with that? To me, after I heard the issue and everything else, it actually presents a great learning opportunity in terms of what do we expect when compliance is done, and then what does this deliver and how does this compare down the road? Because we always get that question also. We've taken the, you know, the compliance element off the table by saying you've got to be in compliance right from the beginning, but this is actually a very good assessment to compare and contrast. So it's not a bad opportunity, it just means more coordination on our end, so that's some work that we've got internally to do. And the last one is, you know, we've got lots of people participating here. People have been engaged. We get feedback all the time. What about the people who aren't participants? How do we get them visibility into what's happening? How do we get them at least access to what you're learning, what we're learning? So that's something that, you know, we've tried to manage in various formats, as you heard a little earlier, right? Some of the information at the MDIC website, some of the information at CMMI. We've got a web page dedicated for some things within FDA. That's something I think that we've got to figure out, not necessarily aligning them into one or anything like that, because it could be fine that it's in disparate places, but maybe we start linking them all together in some way moving forward and putting some of this learning on there. So those are a couple of just key takeaways. The idea of the intake process, and I like the, you know, at least a comment on what is going on in the digital health space, because it was a great comparative, right? There's a lot of both alignment within the initiatives, and there's a lot of effort going on, but I was actually supposed to be at Roche with the intake process this week, but we had this going on. So it's a very different dynamic, right? They're at a different spot with what they're learning because it's a different element. So what feels like it's a little more, once I think you'll see the people going through it, it's probably less painful than I think they envisioned it. But we needed to start somewhere. And honestly, for a lot of what went into the intake, we leveraged a lot of all the work that's been done and learned here to help feed that. So just put that in perspective. Things are, while it looks that way, it may not be as onerous as it looks once it's processed and done. Big takeaways. This is huge. Collaboration is critical, right? We cannot do this in a vacuum. We have to keep moving forward as a collective, right? It's us, it's our, our provider partners, it's, some of the patients and what they're inputting, it's industry. We've got to keep doing this together because every single time I get introduced to something that we had not anticipated before, and we don't have the solution for it. So we've got to really keep learning. Some of the best thoughts, some of the best thinking has really come from these collaborations. So please continue. I think it was mentioned beforehand, this is an idea and a principle that's moving forward, I guess, within the center, right? This collaboration is needed for just success and changing a lot of the framework. Need to think differently. We always hit this one on our side. We get a lot of concerns. I hear it in the background into the questions of the compliance exposure, the compliance risk. Oftentimes, everything gets fit into the construct of how things work now, when in reality, we may be looking at something completely different or need to look at something completely different moving forward. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to challenge that status quo a bit. We don't need to do things exactly the way we are. We need to really be thinking about what's the right thing to do and then move forward from that one. From an FDA standpoint, again, this is something that's internally our learning. We need to be open to hearing some hard realities. Some of the things that we thought were driving, that patient safety activity may actually not be driving the best benefit. Rob alluded to some beforehand, right? How do you continuously improve if you cannot make changes? If that's something that we're looking to drive, and this is not just in the PMA space, right? This starts to affect even in the 510K space. Where's the limitation of what you can change if, there is that perception, there is a barrier, and there's ways to get past that, and we really need to figure out other ways to think things through to get past those barriers. So, comments on the program. We have an open docket. It's open till December 14th. We've had one comment, which was to extend the docket to December 14th, which, okay, check, we've done that one. Some unofficial feedback that we've gotten, and just on the engagements, right? People have been great. They've really been open, sharing, things that are working, things that are not, where they see concerns. There's skepticism still. It ranges. We got, is FDA really doing this? All the way to, it's about time. What do we need to do, and where do we sign up? So it's very varied, but it's at least on the whole been very positive, right? Somewhere, somehow, everybody recognizes that something needed to be done differently. There's lots of concerns regarding how this is applied to smaller or mid-sized companies. It's a big sticking point. We're aware of it. Where possible, we are crafting and getting the feedback to adjust. We've got some of those participants in some of these early enrollment phases to really debug some of their unique needs. But one thing to be aware of and really put in there, it may be entirely possible that what we need to service that space is an adjusted form of this, right? We need to figure out another way, and that flexibility in how we're thinking things through, it's entirely something that is on the table. We can do this. We could do, and maybe there's a solution here for larger manufacturers and a more tailored solution for the mid-sized space, and then maybe a completely different solution for the smaller entities that are more in that innovation cycle, and what they need is more focus on, maybe not the production pieces, but how do you build in the design to begin with, right? How do we tailor things to the appropriate situation? So we've gotten positive feedback on the collaboration, the openness, the willingness to shift. My favorite recently was, having some people tell us, it looks like I need to look for a new job. I thought that was great, and it was funny because it was coming from some of the reg affairs managers there, and it was actually one of our participating statisticians from OSB who actually said, no, you don't need to find a new job. You're not going from regular affairs anymore. You're going to maybe a regulatory strategist. I thought that was a phenomenal answer. I was like, I'm going to steal that. So we're good to go, and we can move forward with that. Some coming announcements, right? So we still have the work going on for the final announcement in review and clearance. So what can you expect in that, right? It may not be located all in one space, but one of the things that I know is key for everybody who's participating and moving forward is a little bit more detail. How are these things going to work? What are the operations? We had a framework of that. We had some thoughts on how it was going to operate. We put that together. We started doing it and realized, well, that was completely wrong. We got to go back and rethink that. That's why none of that's been made available. But we'll start actually, now that we've got some of this learning, some of the activities going on, some of these pilots happening, we'll be able to start formulating that construct a little bit clearer for people. So you could see that being made available through that FR for the people who are participating in the pilot. More of the details on how the submission will operationalize the changes, that's something they'll be looking forward to. The data collected, you saw some of it today. You saw some of the questions. We want to be able to gather all that and be able to answer those questions when it's out there. Some of it will still involve some very collaborative, more engagement from us, maybe CMMI, maybe, and we might even need to point them over to Rob to get and share his experience, right? Because that's still going to happen. And as much as I could sit up here and share to you what I've heard, I don't think it is as compelling as what Rob was sharing and his experience and what was going on there. So that's really going to be more, I think, key to getting that transparency into what they've done and what they've seen out there. Again, where is all this information going to be and how can you guys get to it and will it be updated? We're working on that one and consolidating at least where the links to all the sources will be, because we've heard the feedback and I had a lot of time to really correct that just yet, but that's on our things to do list. Challenges. So I think, Rob, you mentioned it, that, you know, you involved your legal department. Guess what I did? So there are some things that I've learned, right? You know, things like the Paperwork Reduction Act. That's a big deal. There's some things that it does that slow things down, and it's really not about what I thought was great. Well, we're doing all this electronically. We're golden. That's not what it means at all. So for all of you who are interested, right, that really is about how are we creating more burden for industry or anybody else outside the FDA. So one of the things that we're looking to make sure we're tracking and measuring throughout this is how much time is this taking? Really, what is the burden versus value this is offering, so we can really make compelling cases as we move forward with that. The other piece of this is really, again, going back to those information updates. I think we've already had some starts on our end. Stephanie and MDIC have been great. The CMMI Institute has a lot of stuff posted. We need to start bringing that a little bit more focused and putting it in a place where at least you can start in one spot and then move around and get to it very easily. So just some thoughts. Dr. Shern started this earlier today, right? Where we could be. What is it that we're moving forward with? We've got an afternoon session that's really starting to look at these things together, integrating the two initiatives a bit better, right? Where they start feeding together. But what is it that we can really potentially drive to as we're thinking through for the afternoon? We've had one of the things I think fundamentally that we've been trying to do is not just learn from you guys as to what's happening, what are the pain points, but really learn from other industries, figure out what's happening and what's being driven in some of those other spaces. So we've got some goals moving forward, right? One of them being we want to continue this drive to improvement, right? We've got to, the focus is the product quality. You know, how do we add more value through the review and the submission? How do we speed up that innovation and that access to new products? That's something that's key. You saw it in the overall goals that we had in the case for quality, but really this is where we start driving some of the impact. We want to drive that focus on that organizational excellence, right? Looking at things from that system standpoint. Is the system working together, not just the individual product and personal reviews that have been going on right now, right? It served a purpose. It serves a purpose. But if we want to move past that, we've got to start looking broader and in just areas where it's going to have more impact. We can do this. We can create a new regulatory approach around this, right? We really need to think how that's going to play out and what are the potential opportunities there. But, you know, again, don't be constrained. Think outside the box. And then the last piece of this is, you know, how do we get to the point where we can leverage this kind of continuous visibility into what's happening in the organizations in order to help enable some of this acceleration, some of this movement forward, enable a lot of the trust and transparency I think that it's going to take, not just from our side, but maybe even from some of the patient side. And some of these sessions, we've heard it, right? Some of the things that the patients groups want the most is trust. How do I trust that the manufacturer has my best interest at heart? And that's something that I think we need to really leverage what we can drive and pull out of here in order to help move the needle on that one. So just some thoughts from me. This is all Cisco speaking, not necessarily FDA. But what does it take, right? Trust, that's the big one. We've got to focus on what matters, right? That's what the intent of some of this appraisal and this pilot is trying to get at. How do we get to what matters? And then how do we enable manufacturers to just do the right thing? Everybody who's here is focused on doing the right thing. One of the things I think that is a harsh reality that we have to acknowledge is sometimes, you know, the intent of the regulation and its execution and what's happening can drive more focus there than on doing the right thing. So how do we reset that? How do we rebalance that moving forward? And that's where I think you've got an opportunity this afternoon to really think through what we can do. Some things to consider on how we can do this, right? We've already got the continued collaboration. I think everybody knows that that's important. We want to start thinking about how do we reduce those regulatory barriers to simplifying that capability to improve. We talked about it several times. You cannot improve if there's too many hurdles along the way. There's a balance. There's a way we can get that shift happening. Assure that the right things are being done and give you guys the flexibility internally to do what you need to do and to focus on the right things. Big one, benchmarking and learning from other industries. It's a big deal. We've had lots of opportunities to do this. You know, we've brought Dell in to just demonstrate the capabilities of, you know, what looking at data can give you, right? That kind of transparency, responsiveness that builds. I think it was mentioned beforehand by Karen on the recent Dell experience that you guys were exposed to. Phenomenal model, solves, at least from their standpoint, a problem that they've been dealing with all their customers, which is everybody's got data. No one wants to share it. No one wants to standardize because it's a value add for them. But it's this whole construct that they've called federated learning, right? Okay, I don't care if you don't want to share your data with me. Can I at least access it, analyze it there, and get back the results I need? Interesting approach to a broader problem set that they've been dealing with across other sectors, other industries, and really coming to alignment on. Recently had an opportunity to, actually Illumina hosted an event that I got a chance to attend where we got to benchmark some of these practices and ideals moving forward, and there was a presentation from Western Digital solving and talking about what they needed to do and what it took to drive a lot of their improvements, their quality efforts. They had some phenomenal yield and quality performance rates on their hard drives. And I think one of the things I always hear in this space at the very least is, well, it's consumer electronics. It doesn't really apply to medical devices. So I think the gentleman did a really good job of putting things in perspective. When he really outlined the complexity of floating, magnetic head that's only a few nanometers in dimensions above a disk, it's the equivalent of flying like a 777 3 inches off the ground the entire time. And these things have a ridiculous amount of life. There's several of them stacked in one of those heads, and their reliability, performance rates are just phenomenal. But what he highlighted is it takes that ability to rapidly identify issues. It takes moving quickly. It takes a lot more coordination and integration between your systems to get there. It takes visibility. It takes some transparency into your processes. So it's, again, an opportunity to learn from industries that have solved some of these dynamic situations and figure out when we talk about what does good look like, well, we can always start with a benchmark and start moving in that direction. So figure out what it takes to move there. And then the last element, I think, that is really about that enabling trust is how do we develop more visibility, not just between us as a regulator, what's happening within your individual sites, but maybe what are you learning across each other? And then, from the patient's or the provider standpoint, what can they see that is of interest and value to them that we can, really drive and put forward? So this is just, again, this is something that I thought was phenomenal. Somebody came in, showcased this, and I stole it from them. This is Grant Thornton. But, the idea here with and this is all using work that we've done here in Case for Quality, just how do we make those principles, at least from an organizational perspective. This is not touching yet necessarily on the product pieces, but from an organizational perspective, transparent, right? It doesn't matter what you're looking at from your company, what your data is, what your objectives are. End of the day, there are areas that can be summarized and that we would care about, right? How does your leadership monitor that in more real time? How do you know what's happening across a lot of locations? How does the FDA maybe possibly get a chance to look at something like this? And instead of thinking about an inspection approach or something else that's a little bit more static, how do we get more visibility into what is happening in real time? What are you experiencing? Where do we as an agency need to make an adjustment to help either correct or not correct? Do we see some of this stuff being driven across all members of the medical device space? That's something that's very real, right? Again, go back to the 30-day notice, or the concept of rapid changes. That's something that's resulted over time in the way we've operated the system. That's something I think that we as an agency have some opportunity to help clarify or at least move the needle on. But, as we're thinking through the next steps and what we want to move forward with, is this a possibility? What does it take to get there? So again, moving forward, don't be constrained by what we're doing now. Challenge it. I'm usually the first one challenging it, which I guess gets me a lot of pushback even internally, but that's okay. It's not terrible to think through things differently, right? The idea here is, how do we demonstrate that the right things are being done? And that's different than just checking to see that your SOPs are in place and that you've got records around them. And we can look at that in a completely different mindset. We need to change, as we looked at it here, how do we change the regulatory system to accommodate that? And again, this doesn't mean it's just necessarily an FDA job. That means that there is a piece of it that FDA owns. There's a piece that the full market owns, right? How do you drive that reward? How do you drive the incentivization? There's a piece the manufacturers own, right? How do you drive learning? How do you drive focus on the right things? How do you teach even us as a regulator what is important or what's changing in the industry at this point in time? And then for this afternoon, thinking through that potential of where we want to be, what are the next steps that we could be taking in Case for Quality, right? Not everything is going to be resolved in Case for Quality, so we've got to figure out where the balance is. But what are the next steps that will help keep moving us in that direction? So that's pretty much all I had. And if there's any questions, thoughts, concerns, feedback, there's an open docket.
Thank you. Pat Baird from Phillips. I was wondering about Bob's presentation, which I loved, having those real world kind of feedback and very pragmatic feedback. And I was wondering if, I'm making the comment here because it's an idea that I think might help the manufacturers out, is being able to capture some of those lessons learned, as like a little starter kit, but not just intellectually, this is not a QSIT audit, this is a different kind of assessment. As Bob was talking, I was imagining myself sitting there going through the assessment, and even though I've known for years that this would not be a typical QSIT audit, right? I'm thinking of how would I answer the question of, well, we want to talk about how you do communications to other product teams. I immediately went to my training record, right? And, oh, no, look here, I even passed, back in April. So I think that some sort of kickstart, there's the intellectual bits here, they're all true, but also just sort of that pragmatic, how do you get people to think differently? We had our experts at the wrong level. A how-to kit would be great. Thank you.
That's actually good feedback, and I think we'll be taking that one back. So that's actually good to see what we drive that. Yeah. Any other thoughts? No? So, good. I think I got us back on track, right?
I think so.
Good.
We are right on time now, so we're going to take a break for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1:15. Lunch is in the back. Restrooms are downstairs if you haven't figured that out yet. And we'll start back at 1:15. Thank you.